As a massive fan of the Stalker series, I was delighted to see that Chernobylite was coming to the Nintendo Switch. It's developed by the Farm 51 and published by Untold Tales, and it's set in and around the Chernobyl exclusion zone, with a really interesting story but also gameplay premise that's a hybrid stealth, first-person shooter and base builder. Now the publisher were really keen that we tell you everything about this one, so this is a sponsored video where they've also given us a few codes to give to you, plus the whole thing has a ridiculous discount, so make sure you check out the value section. As with any sponsored video, we wouldn't score it, but I am more than happy to give you the pros and cons on this one, as it is a game that I've played previously and I really enjoy. Is Chernobylite going to be excluded from your backlog, or is it an area that's safe to visit? Well, my name's Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp, now let's find out. Let's start with that storyline, where you play as Igor Kiminuk, who is revisiting the Chernobyl exclusion zone to try and find his missing fiancée. I always say that every game should start with some form of train ride, and that's no different here. You're riding back into it, replaying memories in your mind, and I love the way that the colour fades out of the world as you come back to reality and begin to follow a visage of your missing love. Chernobylite describes its storytelling as non-linear. What that means is, very often you'll go on missions and they'll be optional, and you'll meet optional characters or find pieces of information within the world itself that will flesh out the storyline. There's also times where you get to make choices, and they can have a little impact on the gameplay. One such example is we received some intelligence about a group of soldiers going to locate a traitor. Now I wanted to get to him first and pushed on to that mission, again another choice. Eventually finding him huddled in a basement, but unfortunately he wasn't willing to come and join me, and it felt very much like he would then go and betray us for a chance to be taken back by his original group. I was then given the choice of letting him go or not letting him go permanently. Let's not talk about it. So gameplay wise, we have a few different mechanics. Firstly, it does have some linear moments with storytelling segments, and the narrative goes down a split path, focusing heavily on reality but also on almost a fantasy horror. You'll visit parallel dimensions and warp tunnels, only to then find yourself in a residential building in Chernobyl, digging through people's old possessions. The game proper is split between two main areas. Your base allows you to upgrade, change and add items, and there are variable difficulty modes as well. You can actually tailor this quite specifically. You can have things like the combat difficulty, the management difficulty, and yes, it does include some management as well as the building. But let's start with the base aspect. Now, Igor used to live in the exclusion zone. With this in mind, there are people there that know him already, and he's hired people to help him. So then your base begins with one other inhabitant. First, you want to clear out the old rubbish that litters it, and then using the building menu, begin to craft things that you're going to need. Things like beds, a place to cook, a crafting station, all the while keeping your mind on an overarching goal to carry out an excursion, or heist as it's known here, into the heart of the power plant to rescue your loved one, or at least find out what's happened. That side of the game has its own recommendations and steps, I guess, that you'll need to accomplish before you can really get inside, like gathering 5 team members, acquiring 5 different tools, and investigating at least 4 of the different areas. The way that you build and place things in your base will also affect the happiness and the morale of those in there. If you haven't got enough beds for everyone to sleep, then you're going to end up with a mutiny on your hands. There's quite a bit of visual customization you can do as well, cosmetic items that you can place, and everything has a crafting recipe based on scavenged items in the world. Now how that works is also quite interesting. You grab the binoculars, which allows you to look out over the exclusion zone, and then it will show you all of the missions that are available to your group. It's not just you that you have to send out either. I mean, you could just send your team and stay at home, but the best way is to try and make the most of the team you've got. And you kind of have to remember that everyone has a different personality and is going to react differently to the types of missions you send them on. You could send them to something that they're absolutely no good at and will fail, costing you food, potentially their lives, and certainly a good chunk of morale at the very least. So once you've decided where you're going to go and where they're going to go as well, and sometimes there'll be a little icon showing you when there's a specific spontaneous story mission, you can then head out on what amounts to a run. You'll enter the new area, you can bring up a map and see exactly any points of interest, but there's a real free flow to this. while you will have a weapon, ammunition is definitely a finite resource. You've got a small device called the Enviro Analyzer, which was a great idea. It basically lets you scan and then locate things within the world. You can shift between what you're looking for and then send out a pulse to highlight those items. The reason I like that is because it gives a focus still. There's a chance you might get completely lost and be looking for a specific thing that you need, say you need some chemicals, and being able to target that makes a lot of sense. The free flow nature means you might come across groups of monsters or other scavengers out in the wilderness, and it has the feeling of something like DayZ. That was one of my favourite games back in the day. There's this kind of constant underlying tension that around the next corner you might come across a group, and you don't know whether they're going to be friend or foe, but you do have a few options for dealing with them if they are hostile. You can crouch and sneak behind them and then perform a lethal melee takedown. When you first do this, you're actually really bad at it, and I like that idea as well. You almost bodge it up. It means that as you're doing the damage, they're making a lot of noise and you can alert nearby enemies. Now, to overcome that, there's a training mechanic. Back in your base, you can put points into improving in certain areas related to those aspects, be it gunplay or stealth, and one other. The excursions also have a risk-reward mechanic to them. Obviously, health is something that you need to manage, and you can craft while out as well. You could set up a campfire, make some remedies, but you don't want to draw attention to yourself. So essentially, the amount of time you have out on a run, it's almost limited by your survival ability. That's a nice way of doing things. Throw in the fact that Igor is just a human. If this scientist all of a sudden finds himself butchering a load of human beings, his mental state is gradually going to decline. This is shown with the psyche gauge, and the lower that gets, it starts to incur on your vision, almost like the faults of your actions creeping in, and it makes it quite hard to see. It's funny, isn't it, how many games don't give you a consequence for doing these brutal things, or even don't want you to think about it. That's not the case here. Enemies killed can be looted, and there are other things to consider, things like the weather. So as you're planning what mission to go on, you can actually see what the weather's like in Chernobyl, and that has an effect on the mission. So the rain, for example, will dampen down the noises you're making, and if it's foggy, then it's going to mess up the line of sight of your opponents, but also yourself. When you want to return to your base, you've got a device that you can bring up that will rip a portal in the zone, allowing you to step through back to it. Now, I won't spoil why that's there or how, because it is linked to the story, but I do like those fantastical aspects, especially when they allow me to fast travel back home without having to faff about. Post your mission, you then get to decide who to dish rations to, and you must decide carefully as well. Sometimes you could give double rations to improve morale, but another person's going to get a bit jealous if they see someone munching double rations while they've only got half. So the flow of the game is go out on a run, come back, build up your base even further, unlock new technologies, get new gear, and then head out into a new mission. It's very enjoyable. My critiques really with the Switch version would be that the controls don't allow gyro aiming. Now, for first-person shooters, I think that is something that definitely should be in there. So if the developers are able to get it in any way, it would improve things, especially if you could just have that when you are aiming down the sights of a gun. What they've done to mitigate that is allow you to change all the sensitivities and change the auto aiming as well, so that it tracks an enemy so you don't have to. There is HD rumble, which isn't something I'd normally talk about, but it's used for the Geiger meter or Geiger counter, where you're looking for radiation zones, and it just almost throbs in time with the clicks. It's a nice touch. The same can be said for some of the bigger enemies. You'll feel their footsteps before you see them. That's great for immersion. When it comes to visuals, well, I believe this one runs on the Unreal 4 engine. We kind of know how that goes on Switch. Some areas will look great. It uses light very well, and at times it can look nice and crisp. When you're in the much larger stages or in the open areas, it does look a tad washed out, but chiefly performance is actually very solid. I didn't notice any significant drops. Load times, they were about medium, but I also haven't experienced any crashes or anything along that line. I'm sure the developers will keep patching it up, But there's more to be said for visuals because it also includes things like a photo mode and an entirely different game mode where you can basically undertake almost a history lesson. Now that might sound really boring, but it isn't at all. It's done very cleverly in that different areas in the exclusion zone, and it is its own mode, will have scientists in them and they'll tell you exactly what happened and why it's such a big issue. It was a really nice idea on the developer's part, and it really brings it back to reality as well, that this is actually a place that exists.
Scientists estimate it will take 3,000 years for the exclusion zone to be free of radiation.
When you realise that it won't be inhabitable in others up to 20,000, in the climate that we live in today, I think it's worth sometimes keeping those types of things in mind. The soundtrack features both English and Russian voice actors, and the music's very nice as well, very melancholic, but it can also change dramatically if the situation does. Certainly, it gives me Stalker Shadows of Chernobyl vibes in that regard. When it comes to value then, well, you can see the prices at the moment on your screen. This one has a huge launch discount, taking it down 33% for everyone, but if you own one of the games that are in the description, you can bring that down by 50%. It makes it very affordable indeed. It's a really good price, and if you enjoy this genre, sure, it does look a bit like the Switch version, but it still plays very well, and I'd say it's worth that for sure. So that's it really for that one, for Chernobylite. As I said at the start, the publisher have sponsored this, which is why we haven't scored sections. It is a game that's been out for a while on other platforms. It's very good, and certainly at the ridiculously cheap price they're asking, not too bad at all. Thank you to our Patreons and our members. If you guys would like to win a copy of this one, just leave something down in the comments. Let me know what you think of it, anything at all, and I'll reply directly to one of you. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!